Autumn 1944, northern France. The words Thanksgiving feast drifted across the makeshift processing center, carried on the crisp November air. Helga Müller, a 23-year-old signals auxiliary from Munich, looked up from her sparse belongings, wondering if she had misheard the British officer. After 15 months intercepting Allied communications for the Wehrmacht, subsisting on increasingly meager rations of black bread and ersatz coffee, the concept of a feast seemed as foreign as the English phrases she had spent years decoding. Across the Allied advance zones of northern France and Belgium that autumn, 4,219 German women auxiliaries, the Nachrichtenhelferinnen or message helpers, faced capture as Hitler's Western Front collapsed. These young women, mostly aged 19 to 25, had served as the communications backbone of the Wehrmacht, operating switchboards, encoding messages, and maintaining radio contact between German units. Nazi propaganda had prepared them meticulously for this moment, the moment of defeat and capture. "The British will starve you," their supervisors had warned. "They will parade you through the streets, use you for entertainment of their troops, then work you until you collapse." These warnings, delivered in mandatory security briefings, painted images of abuse, deprivation, and humiliation awaiting captured German women. The Nachrichtenhelferinnen were instructed to destroy all documentation, remove insignia, and if possible, blend with civilian refugees to avoid identification. Helga and 27 other auxiliaries had been captured when British forces overran their communications bunker near Liège. They expected to be herded into cattle cars or forced to march eastward under guard. Instead, within hours of surrender, they encountered their first paradox: orderly processing, separate facilities from male prisoners, and female British officers supervising their detention. "Name, rank, and unit," requested a British lieutenant from the Women's Royal Naval Service, offering each prisoner a cup of tea with milk and 2 sugar cubes. Real sugar, not the saccharine substitutes that had replaced sugar in Germany since 1942. The recorded testimonies of captured Helferinnen repeatedly mention this first cup of tea, served in proper cups rather than tin mugs, as a moment of disorientation. British field rations distributed that evening contained items vanished from German military provisions for months. 85 grams of preserved meat, 30 grams of cheese, 57 grams of crackers, and most shocking of all, a 28-gram chocolate bar per prisoner. "We assumed it was a trick," wrote Ingrid Bauer in her diary, recovered by historians in 1987. "We expected to be photographed eating British food for propaganda, then return to starvation. We ate quickly, hiding portions in our pockets for later when the real treatment would begin." The processing center's medical examinations revealed the deteriorating conditions inside Germany by late 1944. British medical records from the 21st Army Group documented that 68% of captured Nachrichtenhelferinnen showed signs of malnutrition, with average weight 11 kilograms below standard for their height and age. Dental examinations revealed vitamin deficiencies consistent with Germany's increasingly desperate food situation. Transport to holding facilities introduced the women to British military efficiency that contradicted everything they had been told about the undisciplined enemy. Unlike the cattle cars used for prisoner transport in German-occupied territories, the German women travelled in standard military trucks with canvas covers, regular rest stops, and hot meals at midday. British Army Catering Corps records show the standard prisoner transport ration included a thermos of tea per 4 prisoners, sandwiches with margarine and preserved meat, and an apple or orange when available. The women's bewilderment intensified as British guards maintained professional distance rather than the anticipated sexual harassment. Female military police supervised bathroom breaks. At night, separate sleeping quarters were established with blankets and ground sheets. These basic dignities, unremarkable to the British, represented incomprehensible contradiction to women indoctrinated to expect the worst. "We began whispering among ourselves at night," recalled former Nachrichtenhelferin Greta Hoffmann in a 1976 interview for the Imperial War Museum's Oral History Collection. "If they treated prisoners this way during transport, What would real camps be like? Some of us began suspecting everything we'd been told was false. The women learned they would be transported to Britain itself, not to Soviet territory as many feared, and processed through specialized facilities for female prisoners. As they boarded the Channel transport under the watchful but correct supervision of British Wrens, Helga overheard a conversation between two officers that would lodge in her memory and later title her memoir. "The Americans mark the occasion with quite a spread," said one officer. "I think we should do the same for the new arrivals." "You mean a proper Thanksgiving feast?" replied his colleague. "Bit of a challenge with rationing, but Command agrees it might help with the reorientation program." Helga understood enough English to recognize feast, but not Thanksgiving. Like most German women of her generation, she had no frame of reference for this American tradition, now apparently embraced by British allies. The concept of captors preparing a feast for prisoners contradicted every assumption about her fate. She dismissed it as either mistranslation or cruel joke. As the transport ship pulled away from the French coast, carrying 152 female German auxiliaries toward an uncertain future in Britain, none could have imagined that within weeks they would experience a meal that would begin dismantling 5 years of carefully constructed Nazi worldview. The British said, "Thanksgiving feast," words that seemed as implausible as they were incomprehensible to women prepared for punishment rather than poultry. November 1944, Isle of Man. The converted holiday camp at Port Erin materialized through morning fog as the German women disembarked from military transport trucks. Whitewashed cottages with intact glass windows and smoking chimneys stood in rows overlooking the Irish Sea, a stark contrast to the bombed-out buildings these women had left behind in Germany. Built as vacation accommodations in the 1930s, the site had been requisitioned in 1940 for civilian internees before transitioning to a women's POW facility in mid-1944. The neat arrangement of buildings with flower beds, now dormant in November chill, contradicted every image of prison camps these women had been taught to expect. "We will be housed in holiday cottages," whispered Lotta Schmidt to Helga as they assembled in the central yard. "This must be for show. Perhaps for Red Cross inspections." The suspicious murmuring ceased as Captain Margaret Foster of the Auxiliary Territorial Service stepped forward to address the new arrivals. "You will be housed 6 women per cottage," she announced in carefully enunciated German. "Each cottage has heating, running water, and proper washing facilities. You will receive 3 meals daily in the central hall. Work assignments begin tomorrow. Obey regulations, and your time here will be correct and orderly." The women were assigned cottages containing actual beds with mattresses, sheets, and wool blankets, not the bare bunks or straw pallets described in security briefings. Each cottage featured a small coal stove, a table with chairs, a washroom with functioning toilet and sink, even simple curtains on the windows. Military regulations were posted in German on each door, establishing schedules and boundaries, but containing none of the threatened punishments for trivial infractions the women had been warned to expect. At 18 hours, the dinner bell rang. The dining hall, a former holiday camp restaurant, contained long tables with proper settings, metal cutlery, ceramic plates, and cups. British Army Catering Corps records show the standard POW ration allocation for women's camps in November 1944. 2,800 calories daily, including 142 Dream protein, 73 grain fat, and 420 grams carbohydrates. This caloric allocation, approximately 85% of active-duty British military rations, exceeded what most German civilians received by late 1944, when rations in Berlin had fallen to 1,700 calories for normal consumers. The evening meal that first night consisted of vegetable soup with barley, shepherd's pie made with mutton and potato, boiled cabbage with butter, and bread with margarine. For dessert, a baked custard with stewed prunes. Tea was served with each meal, with milk and 1 teaspoon of sugar permitted per cup. The women ate cautiously, still expecting some trick or propaganda exercise. The British themselves were under strict rationing, explained historian Dr. Eleanor Richards of Cambridge University, whose 2008 study, Women's Internment in Britain, documented camp conditions. A British civilian's weekly rations included just 50 gras of butter, 225 gras of sugar, 1 fresh egg, and 100 gras of bacon or ham. Yet the government maintained international standards for POWs, even as civilians queued for hours at shops. Within days, the German women established a routine that would have seemed impossible based on their expectations. Morning réveillé at 06:30, breakfast at 07:00, porridge with milk, bread with margarine and tea, work assignments from 08:30 to 12:00, midday meal at 12:30, typically soup and bread, occasionally with cheese or cold meat, afternoon work from 14:00 to 17:30, evening meal at 18:00, and lights out at 22 runs. Work included laundry services, kitchen duty, grounds maintenance, and increasingly agricultural labour on nearby farms facing severe manpower shortages. Helga Müller was assigned to kitchen duties, where she encountered another paradox: the methodical British approach to food conservation that somehow produced meals of consistent quality despite rationing. Kitchen waste was carefully collected for pig feed. Vegetable trimmings became stock for soups. Breadcrumbs were saved for puddings. Nothing edible was discarded. They were simultaneously more frugal and more generous than we expected, Helga later wrote. They used every scrap, yet somehow provided 3 reliable meals daily. In Germany, by 1944, we had efficiency without food. Here they had both. The camp's weekly rhythms included small, unexpected luxuries. Sunday breakfast featured a single fresh egg per prisoner when available. Once weekly, a small portion of jam appeared at breakfast. The weekly bath allotment included actual soap, a commodity that had disappeared from German civilian shops months earlier. Most confounding to the German women was the British tea ritual. Despite wartime shortages, the preparation and service of tea continued with almost religious significance. The precise timing of brewing, the warming of cups, the correct amount of milk added before or after pouring, a subject of apparent national importance. These ceremonies continued even in a POW camp during the 6th year of war. At home, we had been told the British were on the verge of starvation and collapse, recalled former prisoner Greta Hoffmann. Yet here they were, debating whether milk goes into the cup before or after tea, while still providing us, their enemies, with both. As November progressed, the women noticed increased activity in the camp kitchens. Additional supplies arrived, sacks of flour, preserved fruits, even a delivery of frozen turkeys, an unfamiliar bird to many of the German women. British staff spoke of Thanksgiving preparations with increasing frequency. "What is this Thanksgiving?" Lotta asked a British guard. "Is it like Christmas?" "American tradition," the guard replied. "Harvest celebration with a proper feast. Our American allies celebrate it, so we're doing the same this year. You'll see on Thursday." The German women exchanged skeptical glances. A proper feast seemed impossible in the 6th year of a global war with strict rationing throughout Britain. Perhaps this was the propaganda exercise they had been expecting all along, or perhaps something more confusing. Enemies preparing to share celebration with prisoners while their own countries remained locked in bitter conflict. November 23, 1944. Thursday morning at Port Erin camp dawned grey and cold, typical of the Isle of Man in late autumn. Something unusual permeated the air, a rich, unfamiliar aroma of roasting meat and baking bread. The German women emerged from their cottages for morning roll call, nostrils flaring at scents that had become foreign during years of war rationing. "They're actually preparing a feast," whispered Helga to Lotta as they lined up. "I thought it was just talk." The kitchen staff had begun preparations at 4:30, a mix of British personnel and German prisoners working under the direction of Sergeant Williams of the Army Catering Corps. Camp records show special allocations for the Thanksgiving meal: 68 kilograms of turkey, 23 kilograms of potatoes, 18 kilograms of seasonal vegetables, 14 kilograms of flour for bread and pastries, 9 kilograms of dried fruit for puddings, and, most precious of all, 4.5 kilograms of sugar. The dining hall underwent transformation throughout the morning. Prisoner work details arranged long tables in rows, covered them with paper tablecloths, and set places with the camp's everyday utensils. British staff added touches unfamiliar to the German women: small decorative gourds, paper decorations in autumn colours, even handwritten place cards at each setting. "What is the meaning of this holiday?" asked Ingrid Bauer when assigned to help arrange tables. The British corporal supervising her work seemed surprised by the question. "It's an American tradition. Dates back to their early settlers giving thanks for survival and good harvest. Bit like our harvest festivals, but with more ceremony. The Americans made it important during the war, so we're observing it too, showing unity with our allies." The German women approached the special meal with mixtures of curiosity and suspicion. Some speculated it was an elaborate propaganda effort, perhaps with photographers waiting to document German prisoners enjoying Allied abundance. Others feared some form of psychological manipulation, kindness preluding demands for intelligence or collaboration. At 13:00, the bell rang, summoning prisoners to the dining hall. The room had been transformed beyond its usual utilitarian appearance. Tables were arranged in a U-shape rather than straight rows. Small candles flickered in jars at intervals. The serving stations along one wall displayed food in quantities unseen by most German women since before the war. Captain Foster addressed the assembled women. "Today we observe the American tradition of Thanksgiving. Though we remain adversaries in conflict, basic humanity transcends battlefield divisions. Please be seated and join in this meal." The menu, preserved in British military archives, included roast turkey with sage stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, mashed turnips, Brussels sprouts with butter, cranberry sauce from American supplies, freshly baked bread rolls, and for dessert, apple pie with custard. Each woman received a small glass of diluted fruit cordial rather than the usual tea. For many of the German women, the meal represented the first adequate protein portion they had seen in over a year. The average serving included approximately 180 grams of turkey meat, more animal protein than monthly civilian rations in Berlin, provided by late 1944. The cranberry sauce, bright red and sweet tart, was completely unknown to most, who approached it cautiously on their plates. "I remember the moment perfectly," Helga Müller wrote decades later. "The first bite of properly roasted meat, the gravy made with actual fat, vegetables with real butter. The taste shocked my system after years of deprivation." Some women wept silently at their places. British records indicate the meal provided approximately 1,200 calories per prisoner, nearly half their daily allocation in a single sitting. For women who had experienced progressive restriction of food quality and quantity since 1942, the abundance created physical and psychological confusion. Ursula Weber, who had served as a signals auxiliary near Hamburg before capture, documented the women's reactions in a diary recovered after the war. "Monica couldn't finish her plate. Her stomach has shrunk from years of less. Greta ate so quickly she became ill afterward. I save bread in my pocket automatically, then realize the futility. They will serve breakfast tomorrow regardless." As the meal concluded, an unexpected element emerged. 4 American officers from a nearby airbase arrived with additional supplies: 80 individual chocolate bars and packets of American cigarettes. These visitors explained Thanksgiving traditions, the gathering of family, the expression of gratitude, the symbolic foods representing abundance. Cultural confusion highlighted the strange circumstances. German women struggled to understand celebrating abundance during global conflict. The concept of national Thanksgiving during wartime seemed paradoxical. Yet the material evidence on their plates, the meat, butter, sugar, contradicted years of propaganda about Allied desperation. After the Americans departed, British staff organised a simple activity. Each table received paper and pencils to list things they felt thankful for despite circumstances. This exercise, documented in camp records, produced revealing responses. Many women listed regular meals, warm shelter, no bombing, and letters from home. Basic securities that had become precious in wartime Germany. The subtle effectiveness of this approach becomes clear in hindsight, wrote historian Dr. Eliza Montgomery in her 2012 analysis, Gender and Re-Education, Female POWs in Britain. No formal propaganda could match the psychological impact of a roast turkey dinner served with matter-of-fact civility. The meal communicated British values more effectively than any lecture: rule following, fairness, stoicism amid hardship, and maintaining standards despite difficulties. As women returned to their cottages that evening, conversations shifted. The anticipated propaganda cameras had never appeared. The feared manipulation hadn't materialized. Instead, they had experienced something more confusing: genuine hospitality from enemies during ongoing war. Perhaps they can afford such gestures because they know they're winning, Lotta suggested that evening, as women gathered around their cottage stove. Or perhaps, Helga responded quietly, they treat prisoners well because of what they believe, not because of how the war is going. This possibility, that enemy decency stemmed from values rather than calculation, presented the first crack in the ideological framework these women had brought from Germany. The British said, "Thanksgiving feast," and delivered exactly that, without fanfare or exploitation. The dissonance would linger long after the meal digested. December 1944, Isle of Man and beyond. The Thanksgiving meal marked a turning point in the German women's captivity experience. Camp administrators observed decreased resistance to work assignments and improved compliance with regulations. British military psychology officers noted this phenomenon in their monthly reports, attributing it to what they termed the demonstrative effect, showing rather than telling prisoners about Allied values and resources. By mid-December, approximately 60% of the female prisoners at Port Erin had been assigned to external work placements, a dramatic increase from November's 15% deployment rate. These assignments took them beyond camp boundaries into the British wartime reality that Nazi propaganda had systematically misrepresented. The women encountered a society under strict rationing, yet maintaining functional order despite 6 years of conflict. Helga Müller's work assignment took her to Henderson's farm 3 kilometers from camp, where food production continued despite severe labor shortages. Here she observed British agriculture operating without the slave labor that had become commonplace across German-controlled territories. The farmer's wife, Mrs. Henderson, maintained a 0.2-hectare victory garden that supplied vegetables for her family and generated surplus for local distribution. She showed me how to extend food supplies through careful preservation, Helga documented in letters later found by historians. They pickle vegetables, make jams with minimal sugar, dry fruits on special racks. Nothing is wasted. When I mentioned that German authorities simply confiscated food from occupied territories, she looked horrified and said, "That's not our way." The British rationing system itself delivered powerful contradictions to Nazi claims. Established in 1940 and expanded throughout the war, it operated on principles of equity rather than privilege. Each civilian received identical rations regardless of status: 100 grams of bacon weekly, 57 grams of tea, 227 grams of sugar, 57 grams of butter, 1 egg when available, 227 grams of preserves monthly. Supplementary rations existed for pregnant women, children, and heavy labourers, but not for political elites. German women assigned to work in hospital kitchens encountered another unexpected reality. British medical facilities received priority food allocations, but these enhanced resources benefited patients equally regardless of rank or status. Military and civilian patients received identical nutritional provisions, a stark contrast to the hierarchical German system where officer rations significantly exceeded enlisted allocations. Ursula Weber's assignment to Royal Alexandra Hospital in Rhyl, Wales, placed her alongside British civilian women preparing meals for wounded servicemen. Here she witnessed the preparation of specialized diets for different medical conditions, with careful attention to nutrition despite wartime limitations. The hospital kitchen produced approximately 450 meals daily from weekly provisions that included 115 kilograms of vegetables, 84 kilograms of meat, 73 liters of milk, and 29 kilograms of bread. The dietitian plans every meal to maximize nutrition with available ingredients, Ursula wrote in a letter cleared by censors. When I asked if officers receive better food, she seemed confused by the question. All patients eat according to medical needs, not rank, she said. This system seems inefficient until you observe its effectiveness. Work placements in British households, particularly those requiring domestic help due to the absence of men in military service, created unexpected social dynamics. German women encountered British homes where weekly food deliveries arrived with mathematical precision. The family's exact ration allocation, no more and no less. These households functioned under material constraints that would have indicated extreme deprivation in pre-war Germany, yet maintained routines, cleanliness, and remarkably, hospitality. In a development that puzzled German observers, many British families insisted on sharing their limited rations equally with the enemy women working in their homes. This behavior, dividing an already insufficient allocation with a former adversary, contradicted basic assumptions about human nature that underpinned Nazi ideology. Mrs. Collins receives exactly 100 grams of cheese weekly for her family of 3, wrote Lotta Schmidt, assigned as household help to a naval officer's wife in Liverpool. Yet she insists I take 25 grams of their allocation. When I refused, saying prisoners don't deserve equal shares, she responded, "In this house, everyone at the table receives the same portion." This makes no sense from a German perspective. As Christmas approached, the German women witnessed British preparations for holiday observance despite severe material limitations. Families saved ration points for weeks to afford small celebrations. Children's gifts often consisted of handmade toys or refurbished items. Yet the determined maintenance of tradition amid scarcity impressed even skeptical observers. The Christmas meal at Port Erin camp, while modest by peacetime standards, represented significant resource allocation during wartime winter. Camp records detail the December 25th menu: roast chicken, 85 grams per person, potato, parsnip, Brussels sprouts, bread sauce, and for dessert, Christmas pudding with custard. Each prisoner received one small glass of sherry and a handmade card from local school children. More significant than the meal itself was the arrival of Red Cross parcels delivered with British military efficiency despite competing transport demands. Each German woman received a standardized package containing 100 grams of chocolate, coffee substitute, crackers, tinned meat, dried fruit, and soap. The careful international coordination required to deliver these items to enemy prisoners, while British cities still faced bombing, shocked recipients accustomed to German propaganda about Allied disorganization. The women's correspondence, heavily censored but preserved in military archives, reveals accelerating breakdown of ideological certainties. Letters home increasingly questioned previously accepted truths about Western allies. Subtle shifts in language and perspective document the psychological transformation occurring through daily observation rather than formal re-education. "I cannot write specifics," Helga noted in a January letter, "but you should question what we were told about our enemy's resources and character. The reality contradicts our understanding." Most significantly, German women began observing that despite obvious material shortages, British civilians displayed minimal resentment toward enemy prisoners receiving standardized rations that sometimes exceeded civilian allocations. This apparent absence of vindictiveness, even from families who had lost members to German bombs, contradicted fundamental Nazi psychological assumptions about human behavior under pressure. By February 1945, when many women were transferred to secondary camps throughout Britain, their psychological framework had undergone subtle but profound restructuring. What began with disbelief at a Thanksgiving feast had evolved through daily exposure to a society organizing itself according to principles fundamentally different from those they had been taught were universal human truths. The most dangerous discovery, Ursula confided in her censored diary, is not that they have resources despite bombing. It's that they distribute what they have differently, according to need rather than status or power. This suggests another way of organizing society might actually function. March 1945. Various locations across Britain. The phenomenon began quietly, almost imperceptibly. German women prisoners started sending food parcels homeward rather than receiving them. Using wages earned through agricultural and industrial work placements, paid at 2/3 the rate of British workers, approximately 18 shillings weekly for agricultural labour. These women purchased items from their camp canteens and local shops within rationing constraints. They carefully wrapped tea packets, sugar cubes, chocolate bars, and tinned foods in brown paper parcels addressed to families in increasingly desperate circumstances in Germany. The International Committee of the Red Cross, which had originally established protocols for delivering relief packages to prisoners, now found itself facilitating this reverse flow. ICRC records document approximately 4,600 parcels sent from female German prisoners in Britain to Germany between March and May 1945, a period when German civilian food rations in many regions had fallen below 1,000 calories daily. Each parcel required hours of additional work to earn sufficient wages, noted Red Cross observer Felix Schneider in his April 1945 report. The average package contained approximately 2,500 calories of concentrated nutrition, tea, sugar, tinned meat, dried milk, often representing a full week of extra labour by the sender. The contents of these packages revealed the transformation in the women's understanding. Items they had once considered propaganda fabrications, real tea, chocolate, sugar, were now tangible resources they could purchase and send to starving relatives. British censors, reviewing letters accompanying these parcels, documented the explanatory context prisoners provided to families who might doubt their authenticity. "The chocolate is real, not ersatz," Helga wrote to her mother in Munich. "The English eat it regularly, though less now during rationing. Keep half for yourself and share the rest with Frau Weber next door for watching over you during air raids." As Allied forces penetrated deeper into Germany, the women received increasingly desperate letters from home describing collapsing infrastructure, food shortages, and chaos. These communications, heavily censored but preserved in military archives, reveal the growing cognitive dissonance experienced by prisoners living in relative security while their homeland disintegrated. "Dearest daughter," wrote Lotte Schmidt's mother from Dresden in a letter delivered in April 1945, "we have no electricity since the February bombings. Food rations exist on paper only. The shops have nothing. We cook soup from potato peels and old bread. Your father disappeared during the firestorm. If you receive Red Cross packages in your camp, know that you eat better as a prisoner than we do as German citizens." The British authorities, recognizing the psychological impact of such communications, implemented structured educational programs beyond earlier informal efforts. Camp records from spring 1945 document the establishment of information evenings, where German women could attend voluntary presentations on British institutions, democratic governance, and economic systems. Notably, attendance at these optional sessions increased from 37% of eligible prisoners in March 1945 to 82% by May, indicating growing receptivity to alternative perspectives. The psychological transformation that began with food experiences had created openness to formal education that initial propaganda attempts could never have achieved. Medical examinations conducted by British Army doctors in April 1945 quantified the physical impact of captivity on these women. Records show that German female prisoners had gained an average of 4.3 kilograms since capture, with improved hemoglobin levels, reduced vitamin deficiency symptoms, and better dental health. The military nutritionist attached to the 21st Army Group noted that many displayed physical recovery consistent with transition from chronic malnutrition to adequate dietary provision. This visible evidence of improved health despite captivity created another powerful contradiction to Nazi claims about Allied treatment. Women who had expected to waste away in enemy hands instead found themselves healthier than before capture, and certainly healthier than civilian counterparts in Germany receiving news of their condition. The news of Hitler's death and Germany's subsequent surrender in early May 1945 reached the camps through official British announcements. Camp administrators, anticipating potential distress or unrest, prepared for adverse reactions. Instead, records indicate a response characterized primarily by relief rather than despair among female prisoners. When Captain Foster announced Germany's surrender, Ursula wrote in her diary on May 8th, Fräulein Kruger asked if our Thanksgiving pudding recipe could be shared before repatriation. This small moment revealed how completely our expectations had transformed. Our greatest concern was not defeat, but whether we could recreate certain dishes at home. The VE Day celebrations throughout Britain provided another pivotal experience. Rather than facing triumphalist gloating or punishment, the German women witnessed complex British emotional responses. Joy tempered by grief for losses, celebration constrained by awareness of continuing Pacific conflict, and remarkably, almost immediate discussion of reconstruction assistance for former enemies. In several documented instances, British families who had lost sons in the war invited German women workers to share their VE Day meals, small celebrations constrained by continuing rationing but symbolically significant. This seemingly impossible generosity toward representatives of the nation responsible for their personal tragedy created profound cognitive disruption for women raised in an ideology that portrayed conflict as necessarily zero-sum. Mrs. Atkins showed me her son's photograph, Helga recorded in her diary on May 10th. He died at Arnhem last year. Then she offered me part of their family's meat ration they had saved for victory celebration. When I refused, saying it wasn't right for me to take it, she replied, "Dear, the fighting is finished. We must all eat to rebuild." This moment changed something fundamental in my understanding. The British government's announcement that prisoner repatriation would not begin immediately, but that prisoners would continue receiving standard rations despite the war's end, further contradicted expectations. The women had been taught that Western powers, particularly Britain, would extract vengeance once victorious. Instead, orderly maintenance of international law regarding prisoner treatment continued without interruption. By summer 1945, as Britain itself faced severe post-war shortages and continued rationing, the maintenance of standardized prisoner provisions represented significant commitment to principles over expediency. The contrast between this approach and treatment of prisoners in German camps created unavoidable moral comparisons for women who had once accepted Nazi claims of ethical superiority. "We prepared for victory or annihilation," wrote Lotte in a letter preserved in the Imperial War Museum archives, "but never for this third possibility, defeat followed by correct treatment according to unchanging principles." This consistency, despite changing circumstances, forces reconsideration of everything we were taught about our enemy's character. As 1945 progressed, these women began preparation for eventual return to a homeland physically and ideologically shattered. They would carry with them not just improved physical health, but transformed understanding of democratic systems witnessed through the most basic daily experiences. Food shared according to need rather than privilege, rules applied consistently regardless of circumstance, and perhaps most significantly, the realization that humanity could transcend even the bitterest conflict. Late 1945. Dover Harbour. The repatriation ship waited at dock, a converted troop carrier now transporting German prisoners homeward. Helga Müller stood in line with 201 other women auxiliaries, holding her carefully packed belongings, significantly more than she had possessed at capture. Each departing prisoner received a standardized repatriation package from British authorities: one wool blanket, toiletries, a change of civilian clothes, and most significantly, food provisions for the journey home. These departure packages, documented in British military records, contained approximately 9,000 calories of preserved food, 400 grams of tinned meat, 200 grams of cheese, 800 grams of hardtack biscuits, 250 grams of chocolate, 100 grams of tea, and 400 grams of sugar. For women returning to regions where food distribution had collapsed, these provisions represented not just sustenance, but portable evidence of experiences that would sound implausible to starving countrymen. "Remember," instructed Captain Foster during her final address to departing prisoners, "conditions in Germany remain difficult. These rations should help during your journey, but prepare for shortages upon arrival." The Red Cross will maintain feeding stations at major transit points. This matter-of-fact acknowledgement of Germany's collapse, delivered without recrimination or gloating, exemplified the approach that had gradually transformed these women's understanding throughout captivity. The contrast between departure and arrival could hardly have been more stark. Women who boarded ships in reasonably pressed uniforms, healthy appearance, and carrying food packages disembarked into a Germany many barely recognized. Bombed-out railway stations, makeshift transportation systems, and hollow-eyed civilians created immediate cognitive dissonance. These returning prisoners, in better physical condition than the population they rejoined, embodied a visible contradiction to the narrative of Allied cruelty. "My mother did not recognize me at first," Ursula Weber wrote in her 1978 memoir. "She had expected a malnourished, mistreated daughter. Instead, I arrived weighing 7 kilograms more than at my departure, with better color and even slightly new civilian clothes." Her confusion was immediate. How could a prisoner of the British appear healthier than civilians who had remained in Germany? Medical examinations conducted during processing at repatriation centers confirmed this disparity. German health authorities documented that returning female prisoners from British camps showed an average body mass index 14% higher than age-matched German civilian women in 1945. Blood tests revealed better vitamin levels, higher hemoglobin counts, and fewer deficiency diseases among former prisoners than in the general population they rejoined. The food items these women brought home became totemic objects, physical evidence contradicting years of propaganda. Children who had forgotten the taste of chocolate experienced real English bars their mothers had purchased with prison wages. Families gathered around precious tea packets, brewing according to precise instructions women had learned in British households. These small rituals of normal life, temporarily restored through imported provisions, created powerful moments of reflection. "When I unwrapped the chocolate for my niece," Lotte Schmidt told researchers in a 1967 oral history project, her expression of disbelief, first that chocolate existed at all, then that prisoners received it, revealed how completely our society had collapsed. We had been told England was starving, yet they fed prisoners better than Germany fed its own children. Perhaps most significantly, returning women brought first-hand knowledge of alternative social organization, having witnessed rationing based on need rather than status, legal protections that continued despite wartime pressures, and economic systems that distributed limited resources without resort to corruption or connections. They carried mental models that would influence post-war reconstruction. Statistical evidence documented by Allied occupation authorities reveals that regions with higher concentrations of returned female prisoners from British camps showed several notable trends. Earlier establishment of women's civic organizations, higher female participation in early post-war elections, and greater acceptance of democratic governance structures. While multiple factors contributed to these patterns, historians have identified the Britain experience as a significant influence on women who became informal community leaders during Germany's earliest reconstruction. "We had been told democracy meant chaos and inefficiency," Helga explained in a 1965 interview preserved in the Bundesarchive. "Yet I had witnessed firsthand that democratic Britain maintained organization during wartime more effectively than our authoritarian system. They continued producing and fairly distributing food, even under bombardment. This observation changed my understanding of political systems fundamentally." Food traditions themselves became vehicles for cross-cultural transfer. Former prisoners introduced British cooking techniques and recipes in regions facing severe shortages. The careful use of herbs to enhance simple ingredients, preservation methods for extending food supplies, and even the British approach to tea service entered German households through women who had worked in British kitchens. A 1952 survey of cookery practices in Hamburg identified several distinctly British food preparations that had entered local tradition through returned female prisoners. Bread pudding utilizing stale bread, vegetable soups thickened with minimal flour, and most notably, the precise preparation of tea with carefully measured ingredients rather than the previous German practice of weak, casually brewed infusions. The Thanksgiving meal, that first shocking experience of unexpected abundance, remained particularly powerful in former prisoners' memories. Several documented accounts mention attempts to recreate approximations of this meal during Germany's gradual recovery. In November 1949, Helga Müller organized a small Thanksgiving gathering in Munich for 7 women from her former Signal Corps unit, 5 of whom had experienced British captivity. "We had no turkey, of course," her invitation explained, "but we can share what we have with gratitude for survival, just as the British shared their rations with us, despite being enemies." This spirit of sharing limited resources fairly seems the most important lesson we can carry forward. The historical significance of these women's experiences received academic recognition only decades later. Dr. Maria Hearn's 1998 study, Gender and Denazification, documented how female prisoners returning from Western Allied captivity influenced early reconstruction efforts in ways distinctly different from male POWs or civilians without direct exposure to democratic systems. These women's transformation came not primarily through formal re-education, Hearn concluded, but through daily observations of a society organizing itself according to principles fundamentally different from National Socialism. The experience of receiving food according to international standards rather than ideological categories created cognitive openings that no propaganda could have achieved. By the early 1950s, as what would be called the economic miracle began transforming West Germany, many former women prisoners had moved into positions influencing this reconstruction, as teachers, civil servants, and business owners. The mental models they had developed through captivity, particularly the understanding that prosperity could be built on production rather than conquest, and that resources could be distributed according to systems rather than privilege, shaped their approach to rebuilding. The British said, "Thanksgiving feast," words that seemed impossible in wartime, Helga wrote in the conclusion of her 1977 memoir. But they delivered exactly what they promised. This simple consistency between words and actions ultimately taught us more about democracy than any lecture could have. They demonstrated rather than proclaimed their values, serving turkey to enemies while their own families faced rationing. In this paradox lay the seed of our re-education and Germany's eventual renewal.